The way we express and communicate ourselves to others doesn't just happen verbally. Our physical presence plays an important role too. It's clear that visual first impressions count, whether you're making new friends, networking, at a job interview, or on a first date. It's long been known that so-called attractive people can get better outcomes in most walks of life. But what is attraction, and the factors that affect our perception? Is beauty really in the eye of the beholder? I want to explore the impact of physical beauty, how different societies display attraction, and how it has evolved and changed over time.
Beauty is inescapable, and it's as old as we are as a species.
I think the preference is really linked to reproductive potential.
For women in the workplace, there is such a thing as being too attractive.
What science does is it gives the illusion that the observer is being objective.
I began by speaking to the art historian and expert in tattooing, Dr. Matt Lodder. He explained that creative symbolic practice appeared as early as 45,000 years ago.
The idea of self-fashioning, of self-creation, of symbolic communication in a what we might call decorative way is something that's pretty consistent, and actually pretty fundamental to the human experience.
Tattoos, for instance, have been discovered dating back to the 5th or 6th century BCE, from remains in the Siberian permafrost to ancient Egyptian mummies.
In the Egyptian mummies, the images seem more symbolic, so perhaps they're just decorative. More likely, they're part of some kind of sort of social identification, some symbolic function in a social context. In terms of ancient cosmetic surgery or body modification, we find a lot of that across the world. There are examples from India of important figures having noses reconstructed. We find bound skulls everywhere from Latin America and South America to France, binding of the head of a baby before the skull firms up to create a kind of particular elongation, either for status purposes or for aesthetic purposes, or both. In Australia, we find the subincision of the penis, and it also is found in Brazil, which has ritual and sexual and magical associations. We find lots of dental modification, sharpening of teeth, insertion of jewels into the teeth, again across the world. It really is this kind of basic human instinct to modify and change our appearance, either permanently or semi-permanently.
There are believed to be many reasons behind these ancient physical practices. They can be defined as indicating status, as well as attracting mates for fashion purposes or simply to conform to social norms. But this can also be skewed by our current understanding of the past.
For a long time, tattoos on ancient Egyptian mummies, because they were largely found on female mummies, were presumed by Victorian and Edwardian anthropologists and Egyptologists to be indicative of kind of sex work and prostitution. New research really has sort of proven that that's not the case, and that these women, these female figures, their lives and their social roles were complicated and can't be reduced to this modern stereotype.
Body modification is one thing. I want to consider some of the scientific research surrounding beauty and attraction in terms of our own physical features and understand what's important when it comes to mate choices.
If really you take a picture and you copy-paste the left side on the right side, you're going to end up with a weird face. It's really not really natural. But if you have like a really nice way of creating a nice stimulus, then increasing symmetry is going to increase attractiveness until a certain point. It matters, but you can't look for the perfect symmetrical face either. If you're really looking at sexual attraction, I think the preference is really linked to reproductive potential. We live longer, but women still have a lower fertility when they age. Physical traits in men are not really linked to their reproductive potential. And a really muscular male is not going to really make you have like healthier children or have more children, which is different when we talk about female attractiveness. Having a baby for a woman is really, really costly for our bodies, and it's not the case for men.
What's deemed beautiful from culture to culture is vastly different. I spoke to the science journalist and author Angela Saini, whose work often scrutinises and unpicks our prejudices and biases.
There are evolutionary biologists out there, for instance, who have tried to make claims about what is more desirable and what's more attractive to a potential mate. But I think it's very hard to make those kind of generalizations because, as we know, different cultures have different standards of beauty. This idea of thinness or even of certain waist-hip ratios and things like that, they're not necessarily shared everywhere in the world. We have evidence, for instance, looking at Neolithic and Paleolithic sites, and there are many female figurines that we have from 9,000-10,000 years ago, and almost exclusively they're very voluptuous. They've been described in the academic literature by some men as obese because they're very, very large women, sometimes saggy, clearly older. Some of them they've had many children and their bodies show evidence of that. And who's to say that in those human societies people didn't find that beautifully attractive, even though that in some societies now we don't?
To make matters more complicated, it's hard to be objective about beauty, as we are all affected by our societal zeitgeist, such as racial and cultural biases, dependent on where and when we lived.
When Francis Galton, who was Darwin's cousin in the late 19th, early 20th century, started looking at human difference, he was one of the people who founded the field of eugenics. And when he started looking at who had beneficial traits and who didn't, he even tried to draw up a beauty map of Britain. So he travelled the country and he would look at women and decide who were the more beautiful and who weren't the more beautiful, and then map them according to his standard of beauty. And of course, there's nothing objective about that, because what you find beautiful is really up to you. But what science does is it gives the illusion that the observer is being objective.
When it comes to the long-held claims surrounding waist-to-hip ratio in women, Dr. Jean Bouvet found that it's not that simple.
We looked at artwork, so paintings and sculpture. So we went to a museum to collect data. And I started the project thinking, okay, I'm going to find that the waist-to-hip ratio was almost always the same through history when you were trying to depict a beautiful woman. That was not actually true. It was relatively consistent. The waist-to-hip ratio depicted in artworks through history was relatively low, meaning feminine, but we could see some variation according to time. It was a bit contradictory to the hypothesis that the waist-to-hip ratio is a universally attractive trait.
Certain physical traits are important for reproduction. There is generally an overwhelming emphasis on female attractiveness and body shape. However, the pressure should not only be placed on women. Research shows that men too have biological clocks. Sperm quantity and quality rapidly declines as men age, and although this is not easy to identify via physical traits, it certainly is when it comes to age. Just as beauty standards change and are far from objective, how we understand and interpret the weight put on biological features also needs to be factored in.